Welcome to Soulful 7 Conversations. I'd like to introduce everybody to Dr. Jean Regen, who I have now known for 12 years. When I came to Woodmont, you were one of the first people that introduced me and made me feel welcome, you and your wife. So I am 45, and you are getting ready to turn 90.
Yes.
And so I'm coming to you as someone that I find to be first, a gentleman.
Thank you.
Second, such a scholar. You are one of the headier people that I've come across. And then also, and I don't know how you're going to feel about this title, but like a spiritual mystic. You feel...
I'm okay with that.
Okay. You feel like... I just preached a sermon this past Sunday where I was talking about going to the well, and in some ways, I think God puts these people in your path that can speak truth and wisdom and help you see a broader vision of the world and God and spirituality. And you do that, and I don't even think you realize you're doing it.
No, I don't.
Okay, well, much gratitude, because you have been this just a sage in my life. So I really appreciate it. And I just feel like you are this fountain of wisdom in how to live a soulful life, how to live a beautiful life, how to love well, how to take advantage of what God has given us, how to be adventuresome. And you just have a really beautiful spirit. So that is why you're sitting on the couch with me today, Jean. And I'm hoping you're just going to give us all of this beautiful wisdom to take with us. And I'm sure you are. So I'm going to start with a big question. How do you know God exists?
I'll have to start with the awareness of and this has particularly come in recent years, though. I've always felt God existed. And now with what I've learned of astrophysics and been able to read and understand some, at least, of what Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson is talking about in his series of lectures on the nature of the universe, and Eric Metaxas, who has a very broad understanding, and I have enjoyed particularly his interview on more than one occasion with Dr. Polkinghorne, who's a Brit who's an astrophysicist, but after he was an astrophysicist recognized internationally, he decided he would become an Anglican priest. So he has both of those orders.
Wow.
So
okay.
I've appreciated...
Well, I love how if you're going to help me with the science and the faith.
Right. And Eric Metaxas's book on miracles has a section devoted to the great unlikelihood that we would even be here as a species or as a planet necessarily, because we may or may not be the only planet like ours in the universe. There are some that, if Mars, for instance, has had water on it, that doesn't guarantee that it has any live organisms. It doesn't preclude that either, though. But we're unique in that our gravitational pull is just right. If it were a little bit less, our atmosphere would float off and we would die. If there were very much more, it would be so heavy that we couldn't breathe and couldn't utilize the oxygen that we are so dependent on. The water, for instance, if the gravitational pull were less, might just float away. So lots of things are dependent. We're just exactly the right angle to spin without wobbling very much. We change just little bits from time to time. So my awareness of God has come both intuitively with seeing how people heal. And that's been my profession now, 40 years with a rigid discipline of practice, and then probably 6 years or more, maybe 8 years of training. And then these last 20 years, I've continued to practice what I jokingly refer to as my narthex practice.
Because you're an orthopedic surgeon by trade.
Yes.
Right.
And then I think one of the questions that you sent that we might discuss is, what other ways do I know that there is a God? And I have some strong opinions about that too.
Well, do tell.
Well, first, I was blindsided. I was still a resident, but a woman appeared she was in her late 50s, early 60s, rapidly becoming paraplegic, in other words, paralyzed from the waist, or actually mid-back down. And what she had destroyed 2 vertebrae with tuberculosis. And the tuberculous process was pressing on and maybe eating into her spinal cord. And so she needed what is referred to as a catheter procedure. Now, in the Great Britain, they do this all the time. Here, I had no mentor, and I was still a resident, remember. There was no mentor either on the clinical faculty or the permanent faculty that had ever done one of these. So I turned out I was on my own, but I did not feel it was safe to try to move her somewhere. Maybe they had done one. So I undertook to do this. And without going too much into the detail of the operation, got into the tuberculous mass, evacuated it, and with my left index finger was palpating, that is feeling. You can't see the spinal cord. You have to feel it. And using my index finger and then putting a tuteur rongeur is a nice French word, it means to nibble, as you know.
Yes.
And anchoring that piece and then leading it out without damaging the cord any further than it might have been already.
But you touched the spinal cord.
Oh yes, had my finger on the spinal cord and in all the little fragments of bone that were sticking in it. I realized, Farrell, that at some point, the blindsided part was I was not the one controlling my finger. Someone else had a hold of it. And the only definition I could give it was the Holy Spirit was guiding that finger, because I did not have the skill to do that. Well, the long and the short is, evacuated the tuberculous mass, cleaned out the dead bone, got out safely. 2 weeks later, went back and fused her spine. We stayed in communication with one another for probably the 12 or 13 years that they were there in Lawrenceburg, and we could communicate. They became fairly regular visitors here to Nashville, and I would not just follow her up clinically, but that was one thing. And the other thing that made me know that there was a God was my son and I were scuba diving. We were probably 40, 45 feet down in a cave system. A cave system I thought I had known, and in fact I had dived that cave system before. Discovered that I couldn't find my way out. I'd gotten into the cave system too soon, and so had run out of familiar area. Okay, what are my choices? Well, I couldn't find my way out, so I thought, okay, I looked at my dive, and this is at night. Looked at my dive, my watch, and my pressure. I had about 40 minutes of air. I thought, okay, you don't panic. My son was with me, by the way. And I knew then that God had prepared me for this, because there was no panic. I didn't kick up a bunch of silt. I just simply let myself sink down to the bottom and realized, okay, I'm on the ocean floor. And I began carefully to go around the edges of the cave. I could see free ocean, maybe 5 or 6 feet through this tiny little passage. And so very carefully began to rake the sand aside, and there was no panic. I was perfectly at ease. And I realized that, yes, God was with me. You can call it, I appreciate Paul Tillich's observation, calling God ground of being.
Ground of my being.
And that's
yes, I love that.
A very meaningful statement. So, but the long and the short is I was able to get the sand out of the way, squeeze myself through, turn around, and I was either going to let my son, who was slightly bigger than I, feed him the octopus and lead him out that way and just let him jettison his own gear. But we got out and came onto the top. He was able to turn sideways and didn't hang up his regulator. And so we both got out safely with still time to spare. And I said, you want to go back down? He said, no, let's go on.
Let's go back up.
Let's go on to the shore.
Well, so I do think there's something to be said about when you have those grounding moments where something beyond me,
Yes.
beyond my intellect, beyond even my intuition, beyond my capacity physically, mentally, intellectually, is in the room, is with me. And that's when you have those sacred moments where you're so grateful that you aren't the only one in charge,
right.
that someone else larger than you is in charge. If you were to introduce God as you know God to me, how would you do that?
I would say the God that I know is a God of love. He's very, very forgiving. Little arrows that seem to be just dismissed. Big arrows, he'll see me through those. Fortunately, in my life, I've not encountered any great major things. I guess the most major was loss of Elizabeth this last June. That was major. Mm-hmm. But you had enough conversations with her, and what beautiful conversations, according to you and to her. But she said, I'm okay to me, and you're going to be okay. And I took that as gospel and have tried to act on that. Mm-hmm. Not always as bravely as I might have. I have this nice, neat, my metaphor is that my nice, neat left brain, I can operate from my professional brain. And then as I ease over to my more sentient right brain, I don't do as well.
I love your sentient right brain. That's where the soul really comes into play, though, right? That's the part of us that is that feels so strongly our presence here on earth, and that's where we really experience God, is from that sentient place within us.
So I'd say that to end that, rather than go into a great deal of detail, is that God is forgiving. He's very, very generous to a fault, because had I been born 2 years earlier, I probably would have been in the Second World War, a real good chance of being just a foot soldier and killed. Had I been born a year later, I would have been drafted and in Korea, and a good chance of being killed, as were two of my very good friends. The number one in our fraternity died a hero in Korea, but got to continue with my training until I was able to come into the service in the Navy during the Vietnam War and the tertiary surgical referral center. But I could do some good then, and so that was a matter of just birth order, and I was the firstborn I was the oldest son of the oldest son, which always made me sit to my grandmother's right, and I had the first piece of fried chicken.
That's wonderful. Okay, so why would you say we are here? I mean, do you believe there is a larger plan that God is unfolding and that we play a role in that? Do you feel like, I don't know, there is a larger picture, and we can't quite see it? And Paul says we see through the mirror dimly. I mean, do you believe that God has something that is unfolding, that God is very well aware of how each story develops and ends and then transcends?
I do, and I do from two major standpoints. One, of course, is the astrophysical. The Earth has started. It's going to be here probably another 4 billion years, unless we get sucked into a black hole somewhere with another galaxy that we run into. That's from the overall astrophysical, but from the theological, philosophical, personal standpoint, yes, I think that we're here for a reason. We're here for a little while. The good part is that God gave gifts of intellect to people who could continue the research and to determine how we can best live. What we know now, and we think we're pretty sophisticated, will sound very primitive and very ordinary in another very few decades.
Right.
It may take 10 years, it could take 40 or 50 years, but that will be really old hat by the time that comes around.
Well, do you believe that we, Gene, Farrell, each have a unique role to play here on earth, and part of our job here is to figure out what God needs from us and then to fulfill our mission?
Somehow my reaction to that would be, that would give me a position of more importance. I would feel arrogant to make that statement personally about myself. I think I'm here for a reason, and it was to be the best orthopedic surgeon I could. I never sought the Pauline role, or Saul, but Pauline. But I love the Barnabas role. I love to encourage people. And most of the books I've given away, the big ones at least, have gone to young people who were interested in medicine. I've given away my first edition Sabata McMurrick. I've given away the 5th edition Sabata McMurrick to a different person. I've given away 100-year-old medical books and instruments to a young person of our church, in fact.
I love the idea that we're here. That's one of the things I said in the sermon, that I just feel like we fill our buckets with God's peace and love and encouragement to therefore go and do the same for other people. And so you've done that as a healer, as in the medical world, being an extreme healer and encourager. I'm curious, where do you especially feel the presence of God? So I know you've told me before, you definitely do in the surgical suite, and I know that you're an avid outdoorsman. So on the farm, you just were hiking in Colorado, 10 days. You hiked what, 5.9 miles, you said?
Yes.
Yes. Which you are almost 90 and you look like $1 million. We're going to get to the secret of that in a second. Okay.
Sure.
But where do you, Gene, where do you especially, and you're an avid reader too. So where do you feel the presence of God?
I think I feel God's presence mostly out in the woods where it's quiet. I love the quiet. I love to sit in a hunting stand and get in there long before daylight and just sit and listen. You could tell the difference between a chipmunk and a deer. The chipmunk makes much more noise than the deer does in the leaves. Or say a coyote trotting through, or a armadillo wiggling his way across through leaves. He has this certain zigzag pattern that he always makes. Most of them are perhaps females, but those sorts of things. Studying sounds. One of the quotes that I love is from a book that Annie Dillard wrote called Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, and addressing the question, if something really important or wonderful happens out in the woods and nobody gets to see it or hear it, did it really happen? And her quote is this. She said, "The answer must be, I think, that beauty and grace are performed whether or not we will them or sense them. The least we can do is try to be there."
Gene, I just used that quote in my new book. I love that quote by Annie Dillard.
And I've heard sermons built around that.
Yes, it's beautiful.
Farrell, sermons, and I think when I'm in the woods, I audiate. In fact, most of the time, Elizabeth said, you sound like you're dying of some sort of a respiratory disease, but I audiate some sort of a hymn or poetry or something all the time.
Well, I think it's funny you're saying that, because when I'm out, because nature too, that is my place. You know, my life is what you could consider very loud. And so I do have to step away, and I go into the woods just as you go in the woods. And I find myself like I'm almost in a musical, because when I'm trotting along through the woods and I hear a squirrel, I talk to the squirrel, I talk to the trees. You know, it's like we're just in this wonderfully beautiful musical experience being in nature. And I think that in our world now, silence is not sacred, and we don't realize that we need just silence to even just hear ourselves breathe. I think we just don't do that. We're in a culture that is, you should never be silent. You should always be in movement. So I think valuing the silence is the door that opens you to potentially hearing the voice of God.
It does.
Right. Who has been a big influence on your spiritual life?
Well, I'd have to start with my mother.
Okay.
My father was different. He inspired.
Because your dad was a doctor too.
He was, yes.
Okay.
He was an orthopedic surgeon. He was clinical professor at Vanderbilt of orthopedics. He inspired the broad picture, but my mother, first with the Bible and biblical stories, and then went from there to Sunday school teachers. I remember Miss Rundle, the superintendent of the intermediate department, and my teacher of many years, Mr. Oliphant, and then to Bill Carpenter, senior, that was our Sunday school teacher at Woodmont. But I've been blessed.
Okay, so I wanted to ask you, what are some absolute truths that have anchored your life?
One truth is that one has to be committed. And Elizabeth and I talked about this a lot. We were not committed to, well, we were committed to one another, but we were committed to the commitment.
Right.
And that's even stronger.
Let's flesh that out, because you were married 65 years. 66 years. Oh my gosh, that's like a miracle.
Yes.
I'm celebrating this week actually, my 20th wedding anniversary. So you said we were committed to the commitment.
Yes.
So speak a little bit about like what allowed you to be married in such a beautiful marriage for 66 years?
Well, I think two strong personalities. Hers, though, was she was reared on a tobacco farm. And one time I visited there, and I hadn't been there 30 minutes. They had me in the field pulling leaves. And this is where, in the bright-leaf country, where you don't cut the whole stick, you pick the leaves as they mature. But I was out there, and nobody told me to wear a long-sleeve shirt. I came back with a quarter-inch of tobacco gum on my arms, and that was a whole different story. But I've seen her string 600 sticks of tobacco in a day. That's a 14-hour day. But
hard work, then. Is
very
that
hard work.
Discipline, hard work.
She was 5'11". She was 5'11" when we married. She was 5'11" when we buried her. So she never lost height. I'm the one that shrank 4 or 5 inches. But anyway, we felt anchored to that commitment, and being anchored was not a bad thing. Anchoring is it says stabilizing.
And when you find yourself in places where marriage is difficult, where it's not exactly what you thought you signed up for, or you're in a season, how do you? Well,
I did not respond sometimes perhaps as she would have liked, because I tended to get really quiet. And one time she had been gone for quite some time taking care of her mother up in Virginia. And when she came back, I had managed to feel the great need for a much improved sound system, which I set up in the living room. And she stood in the doorway and looked, because some of the packing boxes were still there, being moved out. And we didn't say much to one another for a while. So I thought,
I guess it's that we are committed to the commitment.
Absolutely.
Right?
And
That's a beautiful thing. Committed. You could actually translate that to faith. That you're committed, because sometimes having a faith, especially in the world that we're in, you've just lost your wife of 66 years. You lost a child.
Lost our 4th child. But no, there were not many situations that were challenging to us, because I think we both had understandings of one another and understandings of life and faith and that sort of thing.
A partnership.
Yeah.
A partnership.
Sure.
Yeah, a beautiful one.
It was.
It really was.
We were really good friends as well as loving one another.
Right. I got to witness that. Beautiful. If you were to define faith and what your personal faith looks like or means to you, how would you do that?
I would best characterize it as an awareness of the presence of God. Brother Lawrence and the Practice of the Presence is a good example. That little
Another good book.
Little pamphlet,
right?
Yes.
Practice of the Presence of God.
Yes, and but it's almost like a drone note on the bagpipe. It's that same note, but it's constant and it's there. And the rest of the notes are all played on top of it.
Oh, it's beautiful, Gene. Look at my mystic. You're exactly right. Say that again. It's the one note that's always being played. Every other note plays on top of that note.
And it's called the drone note. And it almost sounds a little bit funny when they first clamp down on the bag.
I had bagpipes at my wedding. I love the bagpipes.
I do too.
I love the bagpipes. That's wonderful. Yeah, I like that idea of, because sometimes people identify faith as like it's the backpack that you strap on that's got the parachute in the back of it. And I personally look at faith as, I don't know, it's just the way of being in life. It's understanding that you are part of something so much larger.
Yeah.
It's the divine presence, that drone note that is always the thread that just runs through everything. And it's part of my job as being a faithful person to recognize it, to recognize when I see the presence of God, and also to take peace from knowing that it is there always. Right. You've just given me a sermon. The drone note. I love it. That's always there. That's beautiful.
You know, the other aspect of faith that I love to reinforce it from time to time, and so much good material is written about our lives and how they impact our faith. And you don't have to just talk about it. In fact, I get a little bit provoked with people that want to hit you over the head with their faith.
I do too. It makes me uncomfortable.
And so I don't care a whole big lot for so-called praise songs. The same phrase repeated 13 times.
Right. It feels very personal to me.
It does.
It is so private. It is so intimate. I'm so grateful for it. I think that sometimes the rub is when I'm not aware of it. And I get into my daily life and I'm very in the culture and I'm too busy and I'm feeling a little bit like I'm the superhero controlling my own destiny. And then I kind of forget. And so it's this constant remembering the presence of God, that thread that's woven into everything. And again, goes back to Paul Tillich. It's the grounding of our being.
Yes.
If we recognize it or not.
Yeah.
If we move from that, would you say your understanding of God has changed over the last almost 9 decades?
Absolutely, because it started out as the simplest concept, and I think with each opportunity to learn something different, and now with the beauty of retirement is I had the latitude to do things with Elizabeth that we never could have done before because of the commitment to a big practice. It started out a smaller practice, and ultimately, in fact, now there are 58 orthopedic surgeons.
I know my brother-in-law is wonderful.
One group, yes. But sure, it would be ridiculous to think that one hadn't changed in 89 years over time. But it started out as a simple faith, but then as one's maturity increases, so does the maturity of that faith. And you draw from watching others and the way they live. You draw from understandings of, for instance, the understanding of astrophysics, and then more recently the time to study geology and paleoanthropology. Of course, so much of the language of God is anthropocentric, and that's a fancy term to say about all we know is what we are.
Right.
We have to define in terms of human characteristics, which we lay on God, and he or she may or may not say, well, yeah, that's the way I am, but that's the best we do, but we keep striving to know more and learn more and be faithful in and to that. You and I have exchanged all sorts of quotations, and so many of them address that kind of thing. But that piece from the Rubaiyat that says, the moving finger writes, and having writ moves on, nor all thy piety nor wit shall lure it back to cancel half a line, nor all thy tears wash out a word of it. So we live our lives, and we hope we don't have regrets that we can't wash out or
right.
cry out. The piece from, you asked about favorite scriptures in the little piece and then I have quite a number of favorites. Many of them I would shout from a mountaintop because they're from Psalms and Proverbs.
Is there one that's particularly?
Isaiah. Well, the first verse of the 90th Psalm, Lord, thou hast been our dwelling place from all generations, before the mountains were brought forth, or ever thou hadst formed the earth and the world, even from everlasting to everlasting, thou art God.
Thou art God.
And then from I think the sixth chapter of Isaiah, the first verse of that in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting upon a throne high and lifted up, and his train filled the temple. Around him flew the seraphim. Each had 6 wings. With twain they did cover their faces, with twain they did cover their feet, and with twain they did fly. And one cried out to another, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. Now, if that's not a statement of faith that can sustain you, and so I love that sort of presentation.
So when I look at you, I said you're a gentleman, you're a scholar, and you're this beautifully spiritual mystic. I mean, what does it mean, and how do you accomplish the fullest life possible here? Because you're like a Renaissance man. I feel like you've done so many wonderful things. I mean, 2 weeks ago you were hiking in Colorado. I mean, I feel like you're constantly going for it. You have such an enthusiasm and joie de vivre for life that is infectious, and you're not letting age stop you one bit. Well,
you just, as what was it, the Marx Brothers thing, you just brought the bird down with the whatever it was that the word enthusiasm, ontios, it means God in us. That's the meaning of it.
Enthusiasm is God in us?
Yes, ontios. And between enthusiasm and the other characteristic that I've tried to pursue very deliberately is curiosity.
Yes.
Don't ever stop being curious.
Those are 2 essentials to life right there. Enthusiasm and curiosity.
Right.
And then you said commitment. Enthusiasm, curiosity, and commitment.
Now, one of our nurses...
Gene, we could just end right there. That's wonderful.
There's one of our residents, actually, she's a resident and a nurse, and I've known her for most of my professional life, certainly. And she has a T-shirt that says, Nurse, the first face you see after saying, watch this. So enthusiasm has to be balanced. You can't do things that, if anything goes wrong, you're going to die. Well,
then maybe that's the 4th one then. Balance, right?
It's
so there is something about, the wanderlust and I guess it's the 7 on the Enneagram, the person that's just constantly maybe over enthusiasm, that there is something to be said about balance in one's life.
And we push that occasionally. For instance, if you saw the movie Deliverance, I've canoed that river.
Of course you have, Gene. I can only imagine you've touched the spinal cord and you've canoed the same river in Deliverance.
We were dropping over 14-foot falls, for instance.
God.
And
So you're an adventurous spirit.
I am, but it's tempered by, I hope somebody else has done this before.
Okay.
And usually they have.
So you like a teacher ahead of you.
Yes.
So you're like my teacher, the beacon ahead.
Right.
So I'm not going on Deliverance River. How about that? Well, so what, I mean, you seem to have lived and are continuing to live such a full life. Would you say that's true?
I think
like,
so.
Like, are you trying to just get every last drop out of the honeysuckle?
Had I wanted to do that, I think, now I'm not certain I would have done things differently, but I don't drink, and simply because very early in practice I realized that to show up in the emergency room, and there were a period of 10 to 12 years, you could ask Elizabeth, I seldom finished a supper without going back to the emergency room to fix a fracture or that sort of thing, some terrible laceration.
But that's kind of exciting too, because I feel like an orthopedic surgeon, I watched my brother-in-law put back in my son's shoulder last night.
Right.
So there is some, you gotta be physical, a little adventuresome to be an orthopedic surgeon.
You do. But that was a long way to say that I don't drink because I didn't think it was healthy. So I never smoked. Boring, I guess you could call me.
No, but you look at you. You're hiking and you're almost 90. And you're not like doing the little like walk around the track. You're like hiking in the mountains. I love it.
I've jokingly said I should have taken my Ellipta inhaler from COPD and held it up and been a poster child.
For that thing. Oh my gosh. You're so admirable.
Hiking at 8,300 feet, I had no trouble breathing and at all, none whatever.
Well, I just, because you are a fan of my blog, but you know that I'm looking at this idea now of God wants us to live the fullest life possible here.
Right.
God also wants us to be kind, to be generous, to love, to encourage other people. But I think God is asking us, I've given you the gift of this experience, this adventure, this pilgrimage, and I want you to get every possible thing you can get out of it, which is the highs, the joys, the mountaintop experiences, but also, the suffering, the disappointment, the loss. Can you speak a little bit of how do you make sense of and also prevail when faced with disappointment and loss, especially with grief?
Yeah.
I mean,
Beryl, I guess the good part is that I have the education to know a great deal about what different disease patterns do to us and the way we can react appropriately or conversely inappropriately. And there are a lot of ways to react inappropriately to grief.
So you're using that medical as a metaphor for how we handle the very human things that we have to deal with here on Earth.
I'm using the education part to be able to tell myself, okay, this pain right now may be really, really bad, but it doesn't mean anything. And so, for instance, one time I got diverticulitis, and I was down in the woods by myself chainsawing some pretty good sized timber. And each time I would run out of gas and need to put gas and oil in the chainsaw, I felt a little bit worse. Then I'd get chainsawing again and busy, and I wouldn't pay attention. Well, finally, about 4 chainsaws full of gas and oil, I thought, I better get back to Nashville because Elizabeth was in California. And so I got back and I called her and I examined myself because it was on a Saturday. And so I had my stethoscope and I determined there were no tinkling borborygmi, so there was no dilating.
You're speaking a foreign language to me right now. But I love the idea that you could examine yourself.
Yes. and talked with the person on call for my internist who was at the moment getting his daughter married that Saturday evening and afternoon. But knowing what things are significant and what things you can just not fluff off, but know that no, they're not going to kill me, and I could take an aspirin or a Tylenol or a couple of Aleve and go right ahead with my day.
So as if that's the metaphor, though, for dealing with, kind of a terrific loss, dealing with change that you didn't really want to have happen in your life.
And yet that change is going to happen to all of us.
So is that, though, God has said to us, and we know that in the scriptures, we know that in the life of Jesus, that you are going to have to face disappointment. Things are not going to go the way you want them to go. You're actually going to have to endure loss and physical pain, but also emotional pain. Maybe the way you thought the trajectory of your life was going to go, it's going to have to be tilted either to the right or to the left a couple of degrees. That God has said this is how it's going to roll.
Yeah.
And so now I haven't told you that life was going to be perfect. If anything, I've told you life is going to be very imperfect. And you just read the scriptures from Genesis all the way to Revelation, and you know that there is not a single human experience in the Bible, including Jesus's life, that was perfect. But it's just figuring out how to gracefully, courageously handle that.
Yeah.
Like I'm already having, heart murmurs about my son Charlie leaving to go to college in a year and a half. So just I think we as humans really have a hard time with change. We really have a hard time with loss, especially when we've invested our heart and our soul into someone like Elizabeth for 66 years. And it's just how can we gracefully, how would you tell us, doctor? How do we gracefully handle the rubs of being human, where we really feel human?
Well, the story of the Eastern potentate who sent his wise men out to all parts of the world to discover a truth which would be valid forever and uniformly and universally true and small enough or pithy enough to fit on the inside, inscribed on the inside of a ring. And after all the time, they came back with the maxim, if you will, the aphorism, this too shall pass.
Oh, Jean, that's what my mom says.
And it's true.
But she says, this too shall pass, which that the really wonderful things will pass, as well as the really terrifically sad, hard, difficult things. Those too will pass. You have to find a way to be balanced.
That's right.
An equilibrium in the highs, the lows, the fallow seasons, some sort of balance, which I guess brings us back to faith, that grounding of our being. If you know with all certainty that there is that one luminous thread that is connected in every single thing, if you hold on to that thread. I feel like there's the poet William Stafford. Are you familiar with the poet William Stafford?
Surely.
He has that really wonderful poem where he says, and I cannot quote the poem like you can, but the gist of it is, whatever happens, do not let go of the thread, which is really beautiful. That actually simplifies it, that when you're going through grief, as you're going through right now, you just have to hold on to the thread. In the midst of change, whether you're going through a divorce or you have an illness or you have to move or you're suffering from aging or, lumps, bumps, and bruises, as my mom would say, you have to hold on to the thread, right? Yeah. Okay, so we talked about how to that we're called to live this full life, and We've talked about how to get through setbacks. I'd love for you to speak on the soul. Because, my whole blog and what I'm doing is this idea of living soulfully. And for me, that is something, that is a sacred way of approaching this life that we have. This, as Mary Oliver says, the one precious life that we've been given. And you have a choice. You can approach it in a sacred way. This is a sacred experience that you are on. Or you can just go through the motions, and it is a very human, mortal, transitory experience. And so for me, I'm trying to myself cultivate this practice of living soulfully, looking for the presence of God, being mindful, noticing when other people need a word of hope, and being willing to give that. I give a piece of me to someone else. Do you believe in the soul?
I do.
Tell me about the soul, because I'm really right now. We did the Izzy interview,
Yes.
and when your body is disappointing you, and you're really looking around for what is something that I can feel that is me, grounded. The soul is the divine in me, the light in me, the eternal in me. In my sermon this past Sunday, I said the heaven in me. I really hold on to that. Can you tell me a little bit about what the soul is to you and what it means to live soulfully, or by the soul, through the soul?
The soul part of me is the essence that ideally and hopefully has not ever changed. I think that's always the same. It's
like almost God put that little, that unique fingerprint in you. That doesn't change.
There was a poem, and I never found the attestation to it, but that every stanza starts, some things will never change, some things will always be the same, and then the rest of the stanza. But the soul, I think, it matures, it's gone through, it may cross the line looking like it's been through a gauntlet, so to speak.
Right. Well, I've said in a poem one time that I wrote that I want to feel like I'm just worn out.
Yeah.
Like I just hiked all through the Teton Mountains and I am worn out when I cross that line.
Right. Well, but that part of me, I think will continue. Now, how it will continue, we call it also spirit. I'd like to hope that I would recognize Elizabeth, our spirits would recognize one another. I'd like to hope that I could look down, because her spirit is very much still here. Mm-hmm. I don't know whether she's going to linger for 6 months or a year or forever. I hope it's just as long as I'm around.
I love that. So you do feel her spirit.
I do, very much
yes,
so. In fact,
I think that's God's gift to us.
But the idea of that, maybe we can look down and say, boy, I'm glad we did this or that for that person. She's given away most of what we've saved in the sense that she said, well, how much are we going to give to the building? I said, well, I don't know. What did you thought about? Well, what she came up with, I said, how are we going to find that? She said, well, we have 3 years to pay it off. So,
well, there is a sense, though, of we spend our lives actually giving away all that we are, so all that we have, until we do cross the line, and it is just our soul, which is maybe tired and weary, but ready for the next adventure. I hope that's not too fairy tale. I really hope that God has created the soul that is lasting and eternal and infinite. I
think so, because there's no reason to think that is not the case. I think if it were something that we've concocted and had no basis in scripture or in philosophy or theology, and those to me, philosophy / theology, are kind of a continuity of the same. So if it weren't so strongly suggested, I don't think we would have just thought of it on our own. I think this is something that's built in,
that we just know. It's like
yes, it's intuitive.
our sonar on the inside, our sonar with God, that, hey, this part of us it's not going anywhere.
Right. And except, hang around and maybe do some good and or go up and I don't envision, you referenced high-fiving St. Peter. I've never high-fived anybody because that seemed a bit arrogant to high-five about something. Now,
well, I think I'd high-five because I'd just be so excited that there is heaven.
Yeah.
And I'm there.
As you know,
and I'd love to see, there's so many people that I would really love to see, and I just really hope, like you said, that our, and I do believe that our spirits will identify.
Well, literally.
Like, I don't know if I believe, I had a conversation with A.J. Levine, who is the New Testament professor at Vanderbilt, and she's very much in the house of, a full bodily resurrection, and I don't necessarily need a full bodily resurrection, unless I'm not 18-year-old self.
Right.
No, I'm just kidding. But I just think the part of me that is valuable is the spirit, and so that's kind of all I need. Okay, so what are 3 things that give your soul joy?
Well, let's start with the obvious. Great music. The Ode to Joy of Beethoven's Ninth.
Okay.
Good gracious, when that soprano, I called her Brunhilde, she was German in the version that I have, and when she stood up and laid that first note on us, I said, wow. And then, of course, the orchestra then just overwhelming and then Mahler's second, the Resurrection Symphony, that last movement just, fills the whole little apartment with sound, and it fills my soul with sound.
Ooh, I'm going to come over to your apartment and have your iced tea and listen to that.
All right.
That's a date.
So
maybe that's how we'll celebrate your 90th.
Sounds like a winner. But great music does.
Okay.
And beautiful wording, be it poetic or other writings, stir my soul. And the other thing that stirs it almost as much is the excitement of watching young people grow up. I see these little people at Woodmont, and then all of a sudden they're almost 6
You
foot.
need to come hang out at the Mason family then.
Well, I'd have an opportunity.
You can help Finn, my 3-year-old.
Yeah, but
mold him, model him.
But those are 3 things that stir my soul, that make me think, I want to keep doing this. I want to do this as long as I can.
Tell me this, Gene. How do you intellectualize death? I mean, I know you've had practice with that in your practice. You've lost people along your life. You just lost your soulmate. How do you understand death?
Well,
and are you afraid of death?
I'm not afraid of it at all.
Okay, why are you not afraid of it? Because most people are.
Well, because one, the understandings of palliative care / hospice care is so mature, and it's going to get better all the time. It has for
Oh, so you mean decades. You're not worried about hurting?
I'm not worried about hurting. I'm not worried about having an agonal seizure. That used to be the case that, the family says, oh, doctor, do something. Well, they've already done it. The palliative care and hospice care.
It is. I feel like hospice is like the angel network.
They can ease you right through that. So,
but are you okay? So do you have anxiety about that this part has come to an end, and then something else, whatever that is?
No.
That crossing. That.
I've been absolutely blessed these almost 90 years in so many ways. And one of the discussions we'd had earlier had to do with the word heartbreak. My heart has never been broken. I've been disappointed. I've been disappointed in myself much more often than I've been disappointed in other people.
I was going to ask you that do people disappoint you, but you disappoint yourself, which I find very hard to believe. Well, I suspect a halo somewhere.
No.
I kind of see the faint outline of the halo.
Yeah, I've had the tarnished part back behind, I guess. But death is simply a part. It's a part of the continuity of life.
Well, can you tell me, I mean, are there things that you've done over your life? So you did say you don't drink and you don't smoke and you're very active. So those are 3 things. Can you name anything else for all of us that are behind you that we should be doing to live to be 90? Because when I say prayer, it's like 93. I'd love to get to 93.
Right.
Yeah, David's grandmother, she lived to be almost 94, and she had a beautiful life all the way up to 93 and a quarter. And so I'm aiming for 93.
Good aim.
Okay,
Good
all right. So, but are there other things that you could say yes, Farrell, either medically or emotionally or anything?
I think the jury is out because the foreman of the jury keeps coming back with conflicting information because
I know.
here
we
we
should
are.
take omega-3s. We shouldn't take omega-3s. We should take calcium. We shouldn't take calcium.
Yeah, or we
don't eat meat.
Don't eat meat, and now they say, well, yeah, a portion of meat's okay.
It's okay.
Now,
I know.
the thing really disappointing is
no sugar.
The medical profession said sugar's fine. It's the fats that cause all the problem. Turned out the sugar industry was paying scientists under the table to report what really were false reports.
Who are our truth tellers? Okay, so then what would you tell us?
Well,
is there anything you've kind of done over the years that you think, yeah, that's actually probably helped me?
I think the biggest thing that's helped has been aware of not getting too fat. Now, do I have a belly? Yes, but that's because I've shortened so much there's nowhere else for it to go.
Okay, so again, we get back to, what did we say at the beginning? Enthusiasm, curiosity, moderation, balance, discipline.
Yeah.
Well, love.
And those are good anchors. And yeah, love.
So you don't have a secret magical pill that we don't know about that we should be taking.
And I look at these, and periodically you show a picture of this gorgeous. In fact, you shared some of it with us in little
the meals that I
sizes.
do. Yeah.
Your meals. And I said, boy, that really looks good. And then I look at the 35 or 32 different ingredients and the sequence in which you have to mix them. And I thought, yeah.
Gosh, okay, I need to go simpler. I tend to be, with 6 kids though, my recipes are pretty, let's do this. I got to do it in 20 minutes. Quick.
Right. But at any rate.
But I enjoy when we were talking about soul joys. I really do. I enjoy a beautiful meal, presentation, the fellowship, the food, the taste, the whole thing. That's one of my soul joys.
Speaking of which, you asked in one of the sample questions, what about that special meal?
Yeah, what would be your special meal?
It wouldn't be Babette's Feast. That was a wonderful movie, though. What a treat!
Yeah, Babette's Feast.
Babette's Feast was. It would be probably the group that would be there would be family.
Okay.
And
what music would you be playing?
I don't know that we'd be playing music because the conversation would be, if it were good, I'd get upset that we're not listening to the music. If the conversation were good, it's going to get a little bit louder. So we might put the music off. Okay. I'd limit the hors d'oeuvre because you tend to fill up on them if they're really good.
Yes, you do, right.
And I love
So what would be your big feast? It
would probably be pretty plain. It would have probably steak, possible venison, but it would have steak, it would have hoe cakes, which is scalded cornmeal, and then cooked in good grease, good animal grease.
Okay.
And
it's not heart healthy, but that's okay. Every now and then, that's a good thing.
But in heavy cast iron skillet.
Cast iron skillet.
So that sort of thing, but it would be a fairly simple meal.
Okay.
And it doesn't.
More important, who's around the table.
That's right.
And that's always more important.
That would be family and
family
and some joking or teasing among the family members. It would, it was almost selfish when Elizabeth was so sick and couldn't be a part of it, but to have all 3 children there. And their families couldn't be. They were the children
come in to visit, right?
But just to come in to visit.
That's kind of nice that you've had your children around the table with you. Yeah.
And
so you you brought a couple of books, which I'm going to
Yes.
put on the blog, things that have been meaningful to you. But you called this the chick book, or the
chick
chick flick, chick book, chicklet.
Chicklet.
It's Gift, and which my dear friend Jamie Thompson gave one to me. Gift from the Sea by Anne Morrow Lindbergh, as
Yes.
being a book that was very meaningful to you.
Yes.
Can you remember something from the book that especially spoke to you?
Well, the fact that she found such surcease from the busyness and of the fame of the family, just getting away by herself, and she frequently would go just by herself. She might have other people come occasionally, but spending it at the beach and looking for shells. And I sent you the picture of the perfect perfect. What does it call it? The wing, angel's wing shell.
Yes,
That I
angel wing shell
superimposed on that
onto
little
the
card
picture.
that's
Yes,
several
that was very
decades
sweet.
old, and that was fun.
I guess it gets back to,
But-
what she does so well is just appreciating the simple.
That's right, exactly.
Appreciating whether it's the people around your table, whether it's being out in nature and listening to the deer or the squirrels, or reading a
Or
book
the
like
ocean.
this, or the ocean, like Anne Morrow, what Anne Morrow said. Okay, so I usually end each conversation with hope.
Yes.
Your definition of hope. What gives you hope?
I think the best definition of hope is that I want to look for the best in both myself and others, and then to encourage that. Now, one has to hope for something, and so that fell into that category of healing, because to heal, we have to have something we're healing toward.
Right.
So you have to have indices of where you are and where you want to go.
Yes.
And if the index generally is moving in an upward direction, that's what one hopes for. That's healing. The hope is that we would, and this is to steal from Elizabeth, just shamelessly.
I feel like Elizabeth is with us.
I
5'11".
think she is.
That's what we were, the tall women.
But she said, we don't love frequently enough or hard enough.
Yeah.
And so I would hope that love would become more a part of the ethos of most of society. Right now, we're so fractured. We're so fractured in this country alone.
What did Elizabeth say about hope again? That we need to. The great hope is that we would love better, love more.
And harder.
Yeah, that's.
So, but hope is, I hope, an upward trajectory of society and subtended by love. But however that translates, right now it's very difficult to try to make sense of it all. But that would be my overall hope. But one can be just a little more selfish with hope, and hope that we as a society here in the U.S. could be the beacon that our forefathers and our founders envisioned us to be. Right now, I think we're anything but a beacon. If I were an outsider...
Let's end on a positive note.
Well, okay.
Come on, Gene, give me something positive.
I'll give you something positive. It's a poem by Anne Weems.
Oh, you introduced me to Anne Weems. I love Anne Weems.
And this is from her little book, Reaching for Rainbows.
Okay.
And I first heard this when President Trott, I think that's the pronunciation, of Belmont University used it in actually it was at a funeral of a patient of mine and ultimately a friend and one of his faculty. But it goes like this: if I could, I'd write for you a rainbow and splash it with all the colors of God and hang it in the window of your being so that each new God's morning your eyes could open first to hope and promise. If I could, I'd wipe away your tears and hold you close forever in shalom. But God never promised I could write a rainbow, never promised I could suffer for you, only promised I could love you, and that I do.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you, Gene.